Hello everyone and welcome to MMA Start to Finish. I'm Julian and this is Matt.
Hi.
And today we will be talking about the first non-chronological UFC event. They called it at the time the Ultimate 95, which is a terrible fucking name, like let's be clear.
Yeah.
Afterward, they labeled it UFC 7.5, which is a little weird. But I get it. Like, it wasn't a numerical UFC. They actually ran ads for UFC 8 during this event. So it wasn't UFC 8. It was its own special tournament. And the whole gimmick of it was sort of a tournament of champions. They had all competitors who had either won tournaments before or were runners-up. So the pool of talent was extremely high. And sometimes that led to cool fights. Sometimes not so much. But we'll get there.
Yeah, at the beginning they said that this is basically a champions fight, and it had several champions, 3 semifinalists, and, quote, the Giant Killer, which I think is Keith Hackney.
That is Keith Hackney, yeah.
Yeah.
I forgot they said that. I was like, who the fuck's the Giant Killer?
Yeah.
It's Keith Hackney. We'll just read you because it's only 8 people. Tank Abbott, Steve Janym, Dan Severn, Paul Varlins, Marco Huas, Keith Hackney, Oleg Taktarov, and Dave Bennett. Those were the 8 tournament. And apparently, we see on Wikipedia here, there were 2 alternate bouts. Joe Charles fought. He won by armbar. And Mark Hall won by armbar as well. How about that?
Yeah. They didn't mention them at all, though.
No, they didn't even mention that alternate bouts existed.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is just Wikipedia information. So this event took place in Denver, Colorado at Mammoth Gardens. Let's take a look, as we are wont to do, and see if Mammoth Gardens still exists. Well, it looks like it's now called the Fillmore Auditorium. It used to be a roller skating rink and a garden roller club. What the fuck is that? It was closed like 5 different times. What the fuck? Is it still open? In 2017, the Fillmore began an ambitious remodel. So it's still around. We don't need to get too into it, but it still exists. It was a small venue, though.
Yeah.
It wasn't a giant,
It was packed, though.
It was packed.
I saw people in the stairway, to some area.
That is the one cool thing about having a venue that is relatively small, is that you can pack it and the event looks a lot cooler when you have a ton of people there.
Yeah. Much to the dismay of people who have to stand in a stairway
yeah.
for an hour and a half or something.
A couple changes. We have, for the first time in the UFC, judges for these fights tonight. They introduced time limits and judges. The time limits, granted, were a little convoluted. So, get this. Quarterfinals, 15-minute time limit. By the way, no rounds. These are all straight. 15-minute time limit. Second round, 18-minute time limit. Weird, up it by 3 minutes, I know. And then in the finals, it's a 27-minute time limit with a 3-minute overtime. So, a convoluted system, but those are the time limits, and we have judges now. And we're actually going to need them, a lot.
Yeah, we are. I think at least 3 fights ended with the judges being needed?
Yeah,
I know
3
2.
fights. Definitely 3.
All right.
We'll get to those, though. Anything you had to say before we get into the specific fights about the changes, the time limits, and the judges?
It's not really a change, but we got Rich Goyne back.
Rich Goynes is back, the ring announcer from UFC Past.
And his famous Echo. Pat Smith was supposed to be in this, but he was medically disqualified.
Whatever that means. They didn't clarify. They just said he was medically disqualified.
Yeah.
And was replaced by Paul Varlins.
Yeah.
So, we were going to see Dan Severn versus Pat Smith. That would have been kind of fucking cool.
Yeah.
That would have been pretty cool. So, let's actually... Oh, one more note about the judges. They actually told us who the judges were and showed them on camera. They would never do that today. It's like a thing in the MMA community. People know the judges are not held accountable. They can make terrible decisions and, they still get called for the next fight. It doesn't affect them. It's just ridiculous. And they're also not, available for interview, not available for question. But in 1995, they're like, yeah, this is this judge who works for this magazine. It was weird. It was crazy.
Yeah.
But anyway, our first fight of the... Oh, I'm sorry.
We also have... who's the dragon guy?
Don Nelson.
Don Nelson. They brought him up and his new movie, Night Hunter,
Yeah.
in a weird promo.
It was a very weird advertisement for a very 90s looking movie.
Yeah.
Like an extremely 90s... Like a movie that was like, The Matrix, that looked good. Let's try and do that.
But with, a ninja...
Vampires and...
A vampire and a dragon. That was the
was the
premise of
pitch.
the movie, yeah.
Anyway. The first fight of the evening was Tank Abbott versus Steve Janym. So, this was a cool fight to see because these guys actually had the modern garb. They both were wearing, board shorts, and they had the gloves on.
Yep.
Steve finally wised up and wore gloves. Tank, of course, had always worn gloves.
They're prepared for once.
Also, duly noted, Tank's yellow kicks. Bright yellow. I don't know if they were Reeboks or Adidas, but they were certainly... I believe the kids today would say Tank was dripping. I don't know what that means, but I think that's how you would use that term.
Dripping?
Yeah, I don't know what that means, but
That's
the
a
kids
new one to
use
me.
it.
Oh my god.
Yeah, we're old now.
Fuck.
Yeah, I don't know. My point is, to end this conversation, Tank had cool shoes. That's really all I'm saying. Tank had cool shoes.
Like, when you call those shoes drippy, and they're yellow shoes...
I don't understand what you're getting at, sir.
You don't understand?
No.
Makes it sound like he pisses on his shoes.
That's not even kind of what I meant.
Alright.
Anyway, let's get into the fight. Tank basically ran through Steve Janym. He went for a big right hand, but missed for the most part. He grazed him, and then took Steve down up against the cage, and I thought finished him with a can opener, but upon further review... do you want to explain what he fucking did?
He just used... Tank used his own head to smash Steve's face up against the fence till he tapped.
Yeah, and he also used his hands to grab the cage, to, pull the cage towards him while he was driving his face in. It was fucking crazy. It was really weird. What do they have that as? They have it on here as a neck crank. It was not a neck crank. Let's be very clear here. I thought it was a neck crank or a can opener, but I don't know. I wouldn't call that bad. That was very weird.
Like, his neck was at a weird angle, but...
He also was in no, real danger. It was super weird. He just, tapped out because it hurt.
Yeah.
Anyway, anything else on this fight? I don't have a ton on this one.
Not too much. Tank went in, he got on top, he went from a half guard to a full guard, and then did that weird head maneuver.
There you have it. Tank Abbott winning by weapon.
By, just his head. He wasn't thinking. He was just doing.
He was using his head, but not in the way you typically mean.
Yeah.
Up next, we have Paul Varlins versus Dan Severn. Two extra large boys. I was excited for this one. But we saw extremely early on, Paul, not a well-versed grappler.
Nope.
Dan, the Olympic-level wrestler, took him down with... about as easy as you possibly... It would be like me tackling a 6-year-old, okay?
Yeah.
It wasn't hard.
A very tall 6-year-old.
A big 6-year-old, but he doesn't have his, his balance right yet.
Yeah.
Unless he plays sports.
Yeah, Paul pretty much fell over like a shit brick house.
Yeah, and then Dan just climbed on top of him, got side control, and put him in a head and arm choke, and closed the show. Squeezed the life out of the polar bear.
Dan just bullied the bear.
Both these fights, by the way, ending in 1:14 and 1:01, respectively. Not very long fights, hence not a ton to say about them.
Yeah.
They weren't boring. They
No.
were good. They were just extremely quick. So it's pretty succinct analysis, honestly.
All of our quarterfinals are very quick fights.
Also, no new fighters for the first time today, so we don't have anybody's backstory to get into. We don't have any felonies we have to disclose.
Yeah.
So, there's not going to be a lot of backstory today. This is like a bonus episode almost, because it's not technically a numerical UFC.
Yeah.
Up next, we have Dave Bennett, the Canadian, versus Oleg Taktarov. This was interesting because they were both grapplers, and much of the fight consisted of them on their feet, just with, hands on shoulders, hands on waist, trying to get one another down. They both could have thrown a lot of knees from the position they were in, but they elected not to. Also, I may be mistaken, but I'm pretty sure a few UFCs ago, maybe even UFC 6, the commentary team mentioned that Oleg was friends with several fighters, and they named Dave Bennett. So, I mean, I know MMA fighters fight their friends all the time. It happens. It's business. But
yeah.
This early on, it just seemed a little interesting.
I guess.
Anything to say about the fight before we get into the finish?
Not too much.
Do you want to cover the finish?
I guess I can. So Oleg got in pretty close. Neither of them really went for a takedown. Eventually, Oleg did go down and tried to get Dave in a leg lock. They both tried to get each other in leg locks because Dave Bennett practiced ninjutsu.
Is that what his style was, ninjutsu?
Yeah. But Dave tapped out but not before he got an illegal kick to Oleg.
Yeah, that's right. He was wearing wrestling shoes, and they're both on the ground, and he, like, threw, like, what would have been an up kick, but it wasn't really up because they were both on the ground going for leg locks. And Big John was going to separate him.
Yeah, he
but,
scrambled.
Like, right before he, like, was able to step in, Dave tapped to the leg lock.
I feel like...
It says Achilles hold on here. So I believe that's a heel hook, specifically.
Now, this is me being a little conspiratorial. This is me thinking maybe Dave realized what he had done and decided to tap before he got disqualified.
I mean, that's possible.
Fearing a disqualification.
It is hard to tell unless, obviously, you're in it, how deep a leg lock is in, especially with these inexperienced cameramen. So we can't really tell how deep that was in, but he tapped fairly quickly.
Yeah.
Anything else on this one?
Nope.
Up next, we have the Giant Killer, Keith Hackney, versus the King of the Streets, the man with no age, Marco Ruas. This time, instead of several question marks, they had undisclosed age.
Yep.
And then they guessed at his age a couple times, which was kind of funny.
They said something like his early 30s.
They think he's early 30s. We did the math on what his listed age on Wikipedia is, and he would have been like 23, by the way. He does not look 23. I call bullshit on his Wikipedia age.
He's extremely ripped, though. My
God.
God.
He's fucking jacked. He's shredded. I'd call him sculpted.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else about the combatants before we get into the fight?
Well, just Ruas and his... I want to call them axe legs, but that makes it sound like he has peg legs. But those things are mean.
So this fight didn't last too long. Marco threw out a couple of his leg kicks and would eventually bring Keith to the ground and take his back, where he would throw a combination of punches and forearms to the back of the head. I was telling Matt, imagine if he had the presence of mind to like actually throw elbows. He would have fucked him up.
Oh, yeah.
It would have been really bad. He eventually fished his arm in there and got it choked, though. It was, again, a quick fight. This one lasting... This is the longest one of the quarterfinals, 2.5 minutes. There was a little bit of action on the feet there that... I don't know if I'd call it even, but certainly more even than it was when it went to the ground.
Yeah. This was also probably the friendliest end after they had finished
they
fighting.
hugged like 2 times after the fight, right?
Ruas bowed, they shook hands, and hugged, and then they hugged again, like 10 seconds later. So they clearly... at least respected each other.
High levels of respect. Full honor.
So right after that fight, we had a brief interview with Chemo, one of the fighters from earlier.
Yeah, he fought Hoist Gracie back in the day. He had that long knob of hair, and he loved Jesus a whole bunch.
Oh, yeah.
He carried that wooden cross out to the octagon. This time, he seems to have toned down on the Jesus, although it was the first thing he said. Also, a new haircut.
Yeah.
And I believe Bruce Beck was the guy interviewing him.
Yeah. It sounds about right.
So what did Chemo have to say, Matt?
Chemo was going on about how being a brawler in this, he realized that that doesn't work anymore. He also realized having a handle for a haircut does not work either.
Not an effective technique.
I have a quote from him saying, "Instead of being a brawler, I'm training." So he's learning how to fight.
Yeah, it makes me wonder what his preparation consisted of the first time.
Probably just Joe
Just like him and Joe-san just like yelling at each other?
Yeah.
About Jesus?
It's like, it's just not going to work out.
This is like super off topic, but with how many crimes Joe-san committed and how close they seemed, you have to wonder if Chemo knew about any of them. You know what I mean?
You do have to wonder.
Like, he had to know that the dude was like a felon. This has become like an ongoing plot point, by the way. If this is the only thing you've heard, you have no clue what we're talking about.
Yeah.
In one of these events, I think it was UFC 2 or 3, Chemo's friend Joe-san fought, and we covered it there. We went onto his Wikipedia page, and we'll put it this way. His Wikipedia picture is his mugshot, and there's like a whole list of crimes, and none of them are kosher. So check that episode out if you want to hear more about that. But anyway, way off topic.
He's still in prison.
He's still in prison, by the way. Anyway, continue on about Chemo's interview.
Basically, Chemo is just going on about how he's learned that he needs to actually think about how to fight instead of just swinging fists and legs.
And praising Jesus.
Yeah. Jesus ain't gonna help you in the octagon.
The first semifinal matchup of the evening. We had Tank Abbott versus Dan Severn. And basically, I mean, it's easy to say because we just watched it, but I kind of expected Dan to just, like, yank him to the floor and do whatever he wanted with him.
Oh.
I have here the textbook definition of a wrestle fuck. Like, he grappled the shit out of him, and you explain what he did to him on the ground.
Well, I've got a whole list of stuff of what he did.
Yeah, you go ahead. You get in your notes.
For my notes, I have down goes Abbott because Dan took him to the fence.
Almost immediately, by the way.
Yeah. Dan starts kneeing, punching, and elbowing almost exclusively Tank's head. He gets a front headlock but loses it and instead knees the top of Tank's head. Tank's holding onto the fence for dear life. Tank... I forgot I had this note. Because at this point we're a few minutes into it and...
This fight went on to the time limit, by the way. Spoiler alert.
Yeah.
Both of these semifinal bouts met the time limit.
Mm-hmm.
18 minutes for the semifinals.
Dan just kept on beating on Tank. So I put it as Dan prefers ground beef over steak. It's funny to me. Dan kept on slapping Tank's ears. More elbows.
He was smiling the whole time, too, by the way. Dan had a big old grin on his face while he was slapping the shit out of Tank.
He was having a blast.
He was having so much fun. Like, Matt, I don't know if you were being serious or you were joking. You were like, no, he doesn't want to finish. He's having fun in there. He doesn't want to end the fight.
I was serious.
Because there was, like, 18 different opportunities for Dan to, I don't know, go for a choke or take an arm or a leg. Like, there were plenty of opportunities to finish. At a certain point, Tank was just a fucking grappling dummy. He wasn't an opponent anymore. There were so many opportunities for him to end the fight. I will see later. It appears one of Dan's weaknesses is his finishing. He can't really... He has the skills to control, but not really the skills to finish. And we'll get more into that later.
Well, we speculated that part of why he does that is because now there's judges.
And there's a time limit he can look to. Yeah, I was going to leave that for later. But yeah, it seemed like Dan's style had changed since... Well, I say that, but he took out Paul Varelans in a minute.
Yeah.
So, like, I mean, you know, I guess in the first round you don't want to gas yourself out, but... I don't know. It was just weird. It just struck me as a weird thing, right? It was weird, right?
Yeah.
Like, I want to get your opinion on it.
It's weird, and I don't know.
It's just strange. But anyway, we'll move on. Anything else about this fight?
Well, we got...
Oh, we still have the finish.
Yeah.
There's no finish. It's a fucking time limit.
Well, Dan kept hammering him. More slaps. Eventually, because Tank's on his stomach this entire time, by the way. Somewhere around the middle, Dan pretty much forces Tank to face him while he gets wrestle fucked.
There's a couple of those trademark knees in there, by the way. The same knees he used to finish Oleg back in the day. I will say, Tank's gloves, I think, and his, like, meaty forearms did mostly protect him from the knees. He didn't get too fucked up.
Yeah.
Like, he wasn't a mangled mess like Oleg was.
For the last 10 seconds, though, Tank did get up and turn around and, I guess, tried to hit Dan, but Dan got out of the way. And
it was too little too late. There was, like, 10 seconds left, yeah.
He's not going to get that one-hit knockout in the last 10 seconds.
This isn't a fucking movie.
There was no handshaking or hugs after this fight.
Just Dan yelling.
Yeah.
A lot of Dan screaming.
I think Dan knew that he was just having fun with it.
I guess. It was so strange.
And Tank, well, he experienced it and he was not happy.
Yeah, Tank had a rough ride, I will say. He didn't enjoy his tangle with the beast. The next semifinal bout, we have Oleg Taktarov versus Marco Huas. I was excited for this fight. I thought it'd be cool. This one also met the 18-minute time limit, but it didn't feel as... What's the word I'm looking for? Drawn out, I guess, as the first fight. Would you agree?
It was fun to see Tank get beat to shit.
Yeah, but it got old.
Yeah.
After, like, 10 minutes, I was like, all right, Dan, like, finish the fight. And then he didn't.
Yeah.
But, yeah, let's get into Oleg and Marco. What do you have on this one? Marco breaking out the leg kicks again, his favorite technique. I will say, not breaking them out enough. They were working great on both of his opponents, and he chose to relent and not use them to their maximum capacity. He also broke out his foot stomps while they were grappling.
True. He didn't have enough time to sharpen his axes between
Yeah.
rounds. They tried to keep a distance at first, but Oleg brought it to him. Oleg brought it to Marcos pretty much the whole time.
Yeah, I have like almost like a chronological thing in the fight here. I say effective leg kicks, Oleg engages, Huos foot stomps, Oleg got cut again. I have a theory, and I think I've heard other people talk about this too. When Oleg got fucked up by Dan with those knees, and he was bleeding really bad, he developed like really serious scar tissue, and every fight after that, he got cut super easily. So Marcos didn't really land anything super effective, but he busted open Oleg, and regardless. So Oleg cut again. Huos actually came out on top of a grappling exchange, but Oleg used that to his advantage to get into a leg lock situation. And Oleg almost pulled that leg lock off. It looked pretty deep, but Marcos knew what he was doing in there.
Yeah. He knew exactly what was happening when it happened.
Yeah, this is what you get when you have people who understand the sport. Again, Marco was trained in the school of Valet Tudo, another precursor to MMA similar to Pancrase, so about the best experience you can get for this is Valet Tudo or Pancrase.
Immediately after that leg lock, Oleg was up against the fence and actually used the fence to help him stand up.
Yeah, that's right.
And then they both backed away and...
Oh, a huge thing in this fight we should mention. Oleg had what looked like a pretty deep guillotine choke, but I guess Big John didn't fully understand the sport yet. Marcos was fighting the choke well, but he was still in a choke, and Big John stood them up.
Yeah.
I found that a little asinine considering he didn't stand up Dan and Tank at all. Like, had he stood up Dan and Tank more, I would have respected that. But Oleg had him in a fucking choke. And thankfully, spoiler alert, Oleg wins this fight by judge's decision. I think the judges realized he had that choke and he had Marcos very close. And also, I will say, at the end of the fight, Marco, it felt like he was stalling or something. He didn't go in for those kicks. He didn't try to engage, and the judges made note of that, and Oleg came out on top. Oleg was the aggressor for the latter half of the fight.
Marco was on the defense for most of this fight. There was a funny part, to me at least, when he got stood up from the choke, and Big John likes to keep people to their corners.
Oh, yeah.
Oleg started walking up too early, and Big John pushes him back to his corner.
Let's get back there!
It's always great.
Big John is a treat. I wish he hadn't broke up that choke, though.
And I can't believe we almost missed this. I've had this in my notes. Someone threw a wiener in the ring.
That's right. Somebody tossed a hog in the octagon.
A hot dog.
A hot dog.
Yeah.
Hot dog. It's not a cock. I'm sorry.
And that's our first item thrown into the ring.
It doesn't really happen. I've never seen that before, honestly. It's not a common thing. I think that the only situation I'd ever imagine that happening in if there was like a terrible judge's decision, and it wouldn't even really be about the fighters. You know what I mean?
They throw the wieners at the judges.
The judges are like hidden now. They're not sitting ringside super obviously like that. They are sitting ringside, I should say, but they're hidden like literal like bunkers. It's weird.
That's pretty great.
Anyway, anything else before we get to the final matchup of the evening?
I hope that's not our last wiener.
I hope they didn't waste, like, because, you know, arena hot dogs are expensive, man. You probably spent like $5-6 on that hot dog. They're going to fucking waste it? It didn't look bitten. It looked full.
A fresh wiener?
I would consider it a fresh wiener. Would you?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I wouldn't. I'm not. Let me paraphrase what I was saying earlier, though. I don't want people to throw food into the ring. It's not okay.
This is not an endorsement to throw your hog into the octagon.
Yeah.
Anyway, getting to the final fight of the night, the tournament finale. Dan the Beast Severn, a rematch with Oleg Taktarov. The first time, as we know, Dan beat the shit out of Oleg, and I was kind of expecting the same. And we got the same, but Dan didn't really, again, look for the finish. Before we get into the fight, I want to mention one more thing. We actually had Ken Shamrock on commentary. It was cool. I will say, though, having like 5 people on commentary, it is a little bit of too many cooks in the kitchen, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But it was cool to have Ken's insight.
Yeah.
They also teased, by the way, I think we mentioned, when we mentioned Chemo, did we mention that he's fighting Ken in UFC 8?
We did not mention that.
Yeah, so the reason that they were interviewing Chemo was because him and Ken are scheduled for a super fight at UFC 8, and they teased that a little bit here and there. So you have more notes on this fight than I do, because this was almost a repeat of Dan Tank, except longer.
Yeah.
So take it away.
We started off with some USA chants, because it's the Russian versus the American. Dan starts off with slaps, which I love how slappy he gets tonight.
I get it. Like, he does it because punches you're gonna hurt your hand, But he's so heavy with the slaps, man.
He's a slapping machine.
He just can't stop slapping.
Oleg started off with a hard kick, and even the commentators went on about it, how it kind of echoed. But Dan pushes Oleg down. Oleg gets Dan's leg.
Was there a leg lock exchange in this one, too?
They
Oleg almost got Dan's leg, right? At one point?
He almost got it.
Yeah, he didn't get it, but he almost got it.
It was very close. And in response, Dan just kind of sat up to slap around Oleg some more.
Yeah, he's, again, real fond of those slaps.
Yeah.
His #1 tool.
But Oleg almost stole a knee bar out of Dan, but Dan rolled out of it. Eventually, Oleg got stuck on his back, and instead of slaps, we had headbutts supplied by Dan.
Yeah, Dan beat Oleg into essentially a bloody pulp, but again, similar to the tank fight, had opportunities to finish and a longer time to do so, and elected to not. This one again went to the time limit, and Dan was victorious. A couple scares here and there, the leg locks. At one point, Oleg, it looked like he was going to go balls to the wall and really go in with a melee attack. But Dan wasn't having it. He just brought him back to the ground. Dan's just too big and too technical for a lot of these guys.
Yeah.
Which is why the hoist fight was so interesting.
Dan eventually, at one point, had Oleg up against the fence, and apparently it started ripping the fence off the post.
I did hear them saying that. By the way, Don the Dragon, I do have to mention, was very upset with the stalling of both Marco Huas and the inability to finish of Dan Severn. He was echoing the points I was making about how Dan... It didn't really seem like he had the skills to finish fights. It seems like he had the skills to control fights, but not end them.
Yeah. And after that fence slight tearing open, they both kind of stood up. Not because Big John told them to, but once they both had started standing up...
Had their footing, yeah.
Yeah. Big John separated them for a second so that they could take a look at Oleg's cuts on his face.
Yeah, they looked at Oleg's cuts a few times tonight. Again, that scar tissue seems like it was a real factor. Dan did permanent damage to Oleg.
Yeah. And during that pause, I got a dragon, so that's neat.
You put that in your notes?
Yeah, I did. I have right here at 8:15, I got a dragon.
I'm gonna edit this.
No, keep it in.
Alright, I went to Medieval Times a long time ago, and it's taking up space. I bought a plastic dragon for $25. I'm not proud of it, but I don't want it anymore, and Matt has been bestowed this dragon.
This is relevant to my experience.
Anything about the beast or the Russian bear?
Yeah, Ken at one point commented about how Dan's right hook shook his world.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, that was why it was so cool to have Ken on commentary, because he's fought both these guys, so he knows what he's talking about.
He knows what both of them can supply. An important note, between these fights, we have UFC, what is it? UFC Fight Pass?
Yeah. It seems like they've edited out some breaks and intermissions on Fight Pass.
Yeah, so Oleg had only 20 minutes between that 18-minute fight with Marco Huas and Dan Severn. Dan Severn had probably about twice as much time between fights.
18 plus 20 minutes, so he had like 38 minutes.
Yeah, so he's way more refreshed.
Yeah, it's a jank system, the tournament format. It didn't crumble here. I will say, again, no alternates were needed in the making of this card. But the format is still a little questionable, you know?
Yeah.
They actually had a conversation with Ken about if he liked the super fight format, and he was talking about how, he was basically saying, like, I freaking earned it, which is fair, but I think it's a better system, and it's the system we have today, essentially, so yeah. We see it developing.
We went to time, we went through overtime, and went out of overtime.
To decision, and Dan Severn, the victor of the Ultimate 95.
And he got $150,000.
Yeah.
3 times the amount that we had in the very beginning.
So, making moves financially, the UFC, in the year 1995.
Oleg Taktarov got $25,000?
I think he got $25K as the runner-up.
Yeah.
I believe everybody in the quarterfinal or the semifinals got $25K, and Oleg got $50K, but I could be wrong about that. I don't know. They were a little unclear about the prizes, but Dan definitely won $150,000.
Dan, big man with the plan.
Dan taking home a fat bag of cash. Anything else before we close the show?
Let's look at what we have in store for 8.
So what we see here for UFC 8 is a picture, obviously, of Ken Shamrock and Chemo, plus what they call the David and Goliath tournament. I'm assuming they're putting a bunch of small dudes in there with giant dudes. We'll see how that goes.
That'll be exciting.
Yeah, well, that's for next time.
I got a smile on my face looking at that.
So, until then, thank you so much for listening. If you're listening on SoundCloud, please hit the heart button. If you are on YouTube, give us a like, leave a comment if you're so inclined. I love interacting with you guys when we leave comments. It's a lot of fun. And we'll see you next time for Ken Shamrock versus Chemo, among others.
Yeah.
Goodbye.
Adios.